went downstairs to the local wine shop and I just got a bottle. And I think that I didn't drink it all that night, to be fair. But the point
Been a
is,
long
like,
day, Phil.
It's been a long week.
been a
I
long
had
week.
a bottle of wine and a pack of Newports, and I just relaxed.
What I was gonna say was maybe just some carbs. Like, I mean, I think that, like, I was gonna go the opposite direction. My dietitian friends are dying right now. They're like, "What are you telling the people?"
Welcome back, Pushin Performance family. This week, JT and I have the pleasure of sitting down with our friend, our colleague, our fellow tennis club member, Maureen Key, for a great conversation on how you can best manage your energy as a coach. And we definitely dip into some of the soft skills of coaching as well. But Maureen is a strength and conditioning coach with over 16 years of experience working with every population that you could think of, from pro athletes to everyday people and facilities across the country. She's been with Exos for the past 9 years, spent a ton of time as a performance specialist, a subject matter expert for product implementation, a lead for staff education, and she now supports Exos' performance design team. So without further ado, let's just jump into this incredible conversation with Maureen Key.
Thanks for coming on the show. I feel like we had, I don't know, I feel like we've always had an episode with you, but it was just from individual conversations. That's in my memory. So I guess nothing was ever recorded, including the things that we just cut. So I'm looking forward to this convo. Hopefully Phil can keep it together.
To see what actually makes the show. You mean?
Otherwise, nothing is really. There's probably not even going to be a recorded show anymore. You know, it's just going to be.
That's fine. I'm just never going to make the podcast officially. It's okay.
I just want to formally apologize to Maureen for the things that I said before that we've since cut from the show. But I'm happy that you're on.
Let me tell the audience something real quick. Phil changed once he moved to Philadelphia. You know, he's a different person. So we're gonna make sure Maureen has a highlight here because I don't want to highlight Phil's diabolical nonsense anymore in this pod. Maureen, how you doing?
Oh, JT, I'm good. Thanks for asking. It's a rainy Friday here in the suburbs of Philadelphia, PA. But we're trying to be positive out here in South Jersey. Unlike Phil.
Unlike me. Yeah. That's fair. That's probably the way you should be.
Yeah.
Gotta find a balance. That's all right. We'll make sure the sun comes out, right, Phil? Let's
try. Try to brighten it up.
Let's try to brighten it up. But no. What are we talking about? We can talk about 1,000 things, but what exactly are we talking about, Phil?
Oh gosh, let's try to get into Maureen's thoughts on what it means to be a coach and carving your path in the industry and maybe some other bits and bobs, as the English might say, Maureen's favorite. But I have a question real quick, Maureen. How would you describe what you do now? So you've done the whole heck of a lot. You've coached everywhere. You've coached everyone. Now you present and coach and teach and design. And so what would be your elevator pitch for what you do now? Putting you on the spot.
No, I love it. I get asked this a lot, and usually my first response is that I usually giggle a little bit because even my own family is like, "What do you do?" And I'm sure that you guys get this a lot of times as well, where somebody, like, the idea of a strength and conditioning coach, it's easy to convey.
Yeah.
But I think, like, I've fortunately kind of like forged this different pathway. And now I do a little bit of everything, like you said, Phil. And I love that. Personally, that's my happy spot, is where I get to be multifaceted and plug into different areas. Like, that's where I feel like I thrive. But a lot of times when people say, like, what is it that you do? And you're like, are you a personal trainer? And it's usually just like, yes, sure.
Yeah.
You nailed it. Perfect.
Sure.
I love that. Yeah, it's just like Like, do you coach athletes? Sure. Yeah, whatever. Whatever you think it is what I do.
Yeah. I mean, like, and here's the thing about me, like, I will coach anybody. I know not a lot of coaches are like that, but I think that really limits you. And if I hadn't said day one of my internship with back then Athletes Performance, we were in a room back then. Mark Verstegen used to meet all the interns. Maybe he still does, I'm sure. But we were in a room, and I was back then in a room with like 12, 15 other interns, the majority of them all male. And Mark asked, who here wants to work with athletes? And everybody's hands shot up. And I was really nervous, honestly, just to even be there. And it's funny because like I actually did have a background of working with athletes, but for some reason that just still felt so foreign to me. And I felt so unsure of myself that I just kind of like held back, and I was like, I'm going to sit here and observe. And in my mind, I had this rationale of, I was like, let me just do a quick math problem. If all of the coaches raise their hand to coach athletes, then we're all going to be fighting for a coaching opportunity. So I rose my hand, and I was one of two people that rose my hand saying that I would be interested in coaching general population. And because of that, I got more coaching time than any of the other interns. And it opened me up to working on the corporate side, which a lot of people snubbed their nose at that time. And that opened me up to so many more possibilities. So I would also say, not that, anybody asked, but if I were to make any, and JT, through our internship programs, like whenever I talk to young coaches, I say, take as many chances and opportunities as you can. Coach anybody, because the more that you learn about the human body, like the more that you're going to, like the better off you're going to be, the more experience you're going to see. And the more that you learn how to coach and figure out, I mean, it took me so long before, when I was first an intern, to coach somebody into a movement pattern, because I was using, anatomical terms. I was trying to impress everybody with like how smart I was. And I was like, I belong here. Like I know words and things. And nobody, but they weren't understanding how to get into those positions. That wasn't helpful, and so I had to adapt and figure out, how do I communicate? And it's funny because I also used to care so much that my family didn't know what I did, because I felt like I needed to prove myself, or my friends or whoever. And, they would just call me like a glorified personal trainer. And at first, like for a while there, like I would get kind of upset about it. But honestly, like I've hit this point where I'm just like, who cares? It doesn't matter. And I think that if you can kind of get to that point where like you're happy with what you do, and you know what you do, and you don't need to quantify yourself to somebody else, like that just shows that you're, at peace with yourself. So I know that's kind of like a far from where we went. I didn't answer your question at all. So
It's okay. There's a lot of good in there.
I think you did. And just to really take it back real quick, and there's a lot of, wisdom within what you just said, but going back to that room, and I think for me, from my experience of, being in a lot of coaching spaces, I think if it was any other room and anybody else other than Mark would have asked a room full of, hopeful personal trainers and asked them, hey, do you want to train athletes? They'll all raise their hands. But why do you think people don't? Like, why do you think people don't raise their hand to say, I want to train the Gen Pop? Why do we always gravitate towards wanting to train an athlete?
The glory, the glam, the chance to ride on somebody's coattails. I think that's really where the ego kicks in. And especially, I can only imagine now with social media the way it is. I mean, literally when I was finishing up my internship, the hot thing back then was Twitter. And everybody was just starting to get on Twitter. And that was like the thing as I was leaving, my internship. So now I can only imagine with Instagram and TikTok and all of that, people feel like they need to quantify what they do from a video standpoint. They need to get the big names. And I think that that's just it. I think it's, you know, wanting to score big, or they think that that's where all the money is as well. I think that's like a huge misconception. I mean, it's not, you know, realistically, football probably pays the strength and conditioning coaches the most.
Yeah.
And you work horrific hours. Yes, you get to work with like some of the best, like some of the coolest people, but like also that's a very challenging grind. You know, you're working with very challenging personalities. You are probably not in control of a lot of the programming and the timing and everything that you're doing. So there's you, and if you are really trying to think creatively, you could probably make more money on your own as well. So it's interesting. I mean, it's not to say it's a bad gig for by any means. You know, I mean, if obviously like if I had the chance to coach pro sports, like I think I would consider it, but I say that like now with hesitancy because it would have to be the right deal. You know, I mean, like there's so many things that I do right now that I really enjoy that I would actually be giving up a lot in order to do this one thing. So I would consider that very differently depending on where you're at in your career as well.
Yeah. No, 1000%. People don't see or you know, listen to that side of it, right? The challenging aspect of it. But when you think about coaching Gen Pop versus athletes, like do you think it's that different, right? Or do you find it pretty similar?
I always, this is, I mean, maybe this is sort of like the wrong perspective, but I always like to treat people like the same, you know, as best as I can. I mean, of course, different personalities are going to like that's what I adapt to is the personality.
Yeah.
And I know I've talked with other coaches, you know, like sometimes we'll get, you know, some pretty high VIP lists. And I've talked with other coaches that are like, I don't want to see the list of who, like, I don't want to look who the people are ahead of time because I just want to coach purely and not have that pressure on me. But I have personally, and I used to do that. Now I do like to find out who it is that's on those VIP lists and find out like what it is that they do because it just gives me a little bit of background and maybe a little bit of a hint of insight of how can I better connect with this person.
Mm.
It's not that I really change how I act or what I coach or what it is that I teach, but understanding somebody comes from an analytical background is helpful maybe in how I approach them.
Now,
Yeah.
man, I want to dig into that a lot. But I mean, going back to Phil's question with the differences of a Gen Pop versus athletic population, is there anything that stands out to her, like, or is there a moment that you had where you're like, oh, they're actually not that different? I don't really need to do anything that different from a programming standpoint. Or did you actually have a moment where you're like, oh, this is a little bit different?
I am hesitating because like for some reason like one of my like a conversation that I had with a very tenured coach was when I first went to our headquarters, was just kind of about the specificity of sports. And this is something that I personally like have found, you know, just like in my years of coaching. So it was kind of cool to connect with somebody else that I really look up to and that is very tenured to say it's all the same program. Like basically, I mean, of course, we'll throw in some differences here to modify, you know, and personalize. But when you're talking about specifying it to a specific sport, you might add in a couple of things here and there, but for the most part, most people need the foundational work. I think, so to come back to your question, I think I'm most surprised a lot of times when working with elite athletes that I might have general population folks that move better than they do in some regards, you know,
Yeah.
because they just play their sport, but they aren't really familiar with like some of the weight room techniques, or it's not something that they practice as much in the weight room. So I think there's actually a lot to teach them, provided that they're willing to learn. And you can say that about anybody, right? Like general population, some are more willing to learn than others. I think with athletes, it gets tricky because sometimes athletes have to be somewhere where they don't want to be, where general pop a lot of times they're in front of you because they want to be in front of you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting call out. Like thinking about, even just thinking about, like you said, like program design and specificity. Like it's interesting to think again, like all these things that we do in the gym or on the field or in life. It's all like movements to skill. And I think people tend to think that, if this person's a great athlete at their sport, they're probably great at everything, which, they might have a leg up and they might be a fast learner for a lot of things. But, you take a move in the gym, like I think about, like a snatch or a clean or something like that, where it's like, if you're the best athlete on the field, they might suck at that movement because it's a specific skill and it's a different skill than they've practiced before. And I see a lot of coaches think, I want to do cool things, in the gym, whether it's sprinting, jumping, weightlifting, whatever it is. So that's why I want to train athletes. And it's like, there's a good shot they suck at it too. Like, especially if you're working with high school athletes, they're probably going to stink at literally everything that you give them. And you're going to be doing the same thing, teaching somebody how to move a little bit better that you're doing right now, with the general population, right? Like you said, it's going to be very, very, very similar.
And I mean, that's not to say like once you get into movement skills and I
Yeah.
think like that's the sexy stuff, right?
Yeah.
And those are the pieces, like I think that those are really interesting. They're cool. You definitely got to do them. That's the type of stuff that like I would personally love to practice a lot more, but the necessity hasn't been there because most people aren't like doing that regularly, and I just wind up sprinkling little bits in, and I feel like that winds up being more beneficial long term. So but I don't train professional athletes like on a regular basis. It's usually I only get them for like little stints, right? So
gotta start doing it more for the tennis court though.
I mean, hey,
pickleball, maybe
No.
Phil?
No.
You pickleball hitter?
No. Yes.
Damn.
What?
I'm gonna make a list of all
what
things
the hell was that?
Phil hates.
What in the world was that, JT? We're on a good roll and you just want to derail the show. That's unbelievable work.
So we have Harry Potter, pickleball.
Make the list.
Coldplay.
And then Coldplay. Yeah.
That's a sound hater list. I feel like that's there's nothing egregious on that list. No.
Our 10 follower account's about to go to 5, bro. Thank you. Thank you.
They came for Maureen, but they left for Phil's hater list.
I know. I gotta stop. I gotta stop this. Let's put the train right back on. But Maureen, with all that you said, I think me and you have a lot of offline conversations about programming and communication also. And when you mention doing some study work on who you're about to train, whether it be a VIP or a Gen Pop, I think that's important, right? To really understand how you're going to communicate the same program. Like if it's a squat, front squat for Day, who works at, I was going to say Airbnb, but I don't know why, whatever, Airbnb, or Day, who's an MLB player, you're just communicating for what they understand it to be, right? And using some references there, but really unpacking that, we were curious on, aside from all those things, when you are a coach, like when we're coaching, those are the things that we're just talking about, right? But in terms of what it means to be a coach, there's probably not any wrong answers, but just curious on what your thoughts go to like, what does it mean to be a coach?
Yeah. The things that pop into my mind first, maybe a little bit different than what I'm gonna like label the things that are maybe a little different than what you would typically hear. But I think being fully present for somebody is super important. A lot of times people are coming to you. This is something that I tell young coaches all the time. It is a privilege to have somebody take an hour out of their day to say, hey, I'm going to better myself in this hour, and I'm trusting you to lead me through this time that I'm taking for myself. I mean, that's huge. This is time maybe away from somebody's work, from their family, from their hobbies, and they're inviting you into that space. So I think that to me is the difference between a great coach and somebody who's placing. Like every single time I coach, it's a privilege. I'm excited to be there. That's one of the reasons that I know Phil and I have talked about this. Like I yes, I'm in a corporate job now, but like coaching and finding ways to continue to coach. I mean, like that's my heart.
Mm.
Like that's why I'm here, because that's how I get energy back. Is I really enjoy um, being able to hold space for somebody else and to help them find the better version of themselves. And I think like along with being present is that you not only are you holding space for somebody else, but like it's not about you.
Mm.
So there's a huge customer service piece with this. In those moments, you can't be on your phone. You can't be thinking about like, what is the next thing, or what am I going to say, or how can I take this to my advantage? It really is a service. And I think that that's the other thing that separates. I mean, we do have a lot of egomaniac coaches out there. I'm not saying that everybody is. Definitely not. Like there's some phenomenal coaches, but it's truly about like how can you help this person and meet them where they're at, make them feel comfortable, and then like, start to do work with them, start to progress them with whatever it is. I mean, like that's another piece of it. Are you actually helping them? How many times have you seen people that they're like, I've been working with so and so for years, and you're kind of like, have you? Like, I'm not really seeing any like progress or,
Yeah.
whatever. And that's not to blame the coach entirely. I mean, life happens, but like, are you seeing progress with somebody? I think that really matters too.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like the word customer service like sounds and feels so icky, but like
Yep.
it's probably one of the more important things to keep in mind. Like, because at the end of the day, we're in the people business, or we're in a people business, and it's not too like there are aspects that aren't too dissimilar from other people facing businesses, like any sort of sales role or any sort of teaching role, right? Where if that person doesn't feel heard or seen or valued, or they're not being engaged at all, like they're not going to come back. Right? They're not going to want to be there with you.
It's so tricky because I think that as you were talking, I was thinking about this, and I think the reason why it feels icky is that a lot of times coaches are kind of teetering on, I'm not a doctor, where if you go into a doctor's office or you see a PT, you're paying time to see them, you're looking at them, they're the expert. And a lot of times, like, you might not be thinking that they need to get you water or get you a towel or anything like that. So I would say that it's a little bit tricky because
Yeah.
no, you're not their personal assistant, but at the same time, so you do want to like have respect and not like do a whole bunch of menial tasks and get caught up in all of that. But you also, um, want to show that you're there with their best interest at heart. So I think there's a little bit of balance there, but little things like setting up the environment before you come, showing that you're prepared for the session, that somebody's potentially paying for this. So I hope so. I mean, but it's just like small stuff like that. I go to a local studio sometimes. It's a local bar Pilates yoga studio, and one of the things, shout out Alchemyx, they're amazing. I'll give them a shout out. And they've got a South Jersey and a Navy Yard location, and I'm running late because traffic, and I text the owner and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna be there. I'm just running like a couple minutes late. And she replies back. Now, like some places can be really snotty, right? And they're just like, oh, doors closed. Don't even bother interrupting us. Sorry.
Yeah.
And but instead I get a message back saying like, hey, we've got your place all set up. Like they set up my mat, they got my equipment and everything out. And little things like that just make a really big difference. Like now all of a sudden I'm being encouraged to come in and work out. So I think like attention to details is more what I mean around customer service.
Mm,
So if you can think of it maybe like that, of just like looking for those little things. And then I think another thing is like making sure that your client feels comfortable, that they're included in the conversation. I mean, how many times does somebody come in and they start talking to you about, something that's an A and B conversation that your client is sort of left in the wind and they're left doing their own reps and they're like, am I still doing this? And, you know, so it's also controlling the environment in that way to say, either like let them in on the joke or to say, hey, love to catch up with you later.
mm.
Yeah.
So,
Man, there's like so much within that. It took me years to really understand like the social acuity that you just mentioned there. But going back to customer service, like for me, I agree with everything you said, and especially when it comes to being on time or being prepared for each session. Um, I'm still trying to sharpen that up myself, and Phil knows I'm late to everything. You know I'm scheduled with him, and it's not only him. And I think it's been something I've been thinking about lately too, and how to switch my mind frame from like it's not a small thing. Like, we say it to be a small thing, but it's not like a small thing. So it's like, how do we shift our mindset from these things are part of what we do? Not It's not any bigger or smaller. It's what we do, right? Being on time, showing that you care about them, and not or including them in conversations within the room. It's all things that like it's for me when I think back, like I don't even know how I learned it. I literally don't. Maybe through conversations. It was in school. I learned what a femur was, and it took me like a month to memorize what that is. Distinguishing that from a fibula, right? So I'm curious how you learned those things, and when did you feel like those were important?
that would be a conversation that takes us like really, really deep is
Do
the
it.
full answer. But
Whoa.
I think that you've mentioned like so many really great things. I think that some coaches, like this was actually something. Social acuity is a great term. So I like that, JT. I'm going to steal it a little bit from you. That was one thing I was told as an intern. I felt in some ways that my technical strength wasn't my textbook technical strength, maybe not as high as some of the other interns and coaches. But one thing that I was told was my connection with people and the way that I'm able to interact with them. That's something that's a lot harder for coaches to learn if you're not innate with it than the technical skills. We can teach you all those other pieces, but human connection, like that takes some learning, to your point, JT. And some people come by it naturally. Some people, they've really got to work on it. Um, it is a skill. Everybody is built a little bit differently. I think like I came by it a little bit naturally. I'm a middle child, and I also grew up in a household where there were my mom suffered from some severe depression and mood disorder, bipolar. And one thing that I've learned over time is that being a child of somebody with, or in a family or a household where you do have a strong mood disorder, a lot of times you just, especially as a child, learn to observe a lot of unsaid cues. So it's more of a survival skill that you pick up. But what I think is really interesting is anybody can learn that. That's why like meditation is so important. Actually, I'm going to tie this back together because if you are totally present and you are working where somebody else's interests, like your clients, are at first at heart, it's so important to also give yourself time to not only prepare, but also unwind and like come back to yourself. So you asked me earlier, like what's actually been on my mind. I think like something that's been on my mind lately a lot is how do you ground yourself and connect back to yourself? And I think that that's really important, regardless if you're a coach or, a high end executive at a corporate finance place, or whatever it is that you do, it's so important that you come back and just sort of like touch base. Like almost think about it like a hunting dog. If you've ever been with like a well-trained dog on a hike or a hunt or whatever, and
Not
you
mine.
whistle all the time. Yeah.
Sorry.
And I know
Sorry,
this is sort
Kingsley.
of it's oh, Kingsley. This is sort of an obscure reference, but like sometimes you'll have a dog and you can call it to like touch. So I had a friend who had a dog like this, and the dog would just go off of free off the leash and just like run throughout the forest, and then she would yell touch, and the dog would come back and just touch its nose with
Huh.
her. So then she knew exactly like if he wasn't ever getting like too far away. And I think if we could bring that back to like, you can let me know if this works or not. It's a journey, I know. But I think that if we bring it back to ourselves, do you have points in the day where you're able to come back? And I'm finding I'm sort of on this journey where I tend to be like a highly sensitive personality. And sensitive, I know, gets a bad rap in today's, like colloquial language and all of that. But
Use demure. We'll use that too.
oh, I love that. Yes.
Not the same.
Phil hates it.
Sorry. Go on.
We'll add that to the hater list.
Just when JT says it.
Go on, Maureen.
But continue, Maureen. Continue.
Apologize.
So what I mean by that is sensitive more that it just that this is something where like I'm more I might be pulled a little bit more to different energies or vibes. And I know that sounds really woo-woo, but here's the thing is we all have sort of like a sixth sense about us. And not all of us are in tune with it. But the sixth sense is like the unsaid things that are happening in the environment. It's knowing that somebody feels uncomfortable. And I think like that's important, like when you're working with a big group of folks is, and the way that I can tell somebody feels uncomfortable, you're picking up like a lot of subconscious cues. And so it's just like when you coach, you start to like pick up on different people's movement patterns and you understand the different mechanics, and you might be able to see that when they do a reverse lunge and their knee comes out to the side, that you're like, oh, they might have some tightness with their internal hip rotator. So that might be something that you're automatically putting together. This kind of is almost the same way where you start to see like their facial expression change just a little bit, that maybe their body language changes, maybe they start to drift away from the group, they just get really quiet. Those are sorts of things where you start to pick up and you're like, something has changed here.
Yep.
And how can I like bring them back, or how can I orchestrate? But I think a lot of people ignore those things, and it's not so much ignoring, but they're just not picking up on it because they haven't really taken the time to observe. So
Right.
I'm going to
Now,
offer a piece of advice.
Sorry,
Sorry.
just to interrupt you real quick there. When it comes to that, I'm really curious because when it comes to like energies and vibrations that we talk about here a lot, what's the skill there that we can really understand on how to develop? Because for me, when I first started, it's always been said as something you could just have or something you just feel. Where like that, like I understand what you're saying, but I know for a lot of people it doesn't connect. Like now what? Like is that something I could work on? Like what is it that I can work on other than just feeling the woo woo ness of it, right? What is the thing there that we can really understand as a coach? And it might be that touch and go reference that you mentioned earlier, but is there something that we can really take from a step-by-step perspective on like not to ignore it?
Yeah. Thank you for stopping my rambling train, by the way, because that helped us get back on the tracks here. So there's a fantastic book, and JT, I believe we talked about this like maybe a couple of years ago. But there's a book that I think is really helpful. Alda, if you're familiar, he used to star on the TV show MASH. But after his time, it feels like I do not understand this. I'm way too
I've read this book.
young for this.
The book is what is it? It's if I was understanding what you're saying, would I be making this face?
Would I have this look on my face?
There
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Alda?
Yeah.
when you mentioned MASH, that's like my time to go to bed TV show. But we'll put that in reference. We'll put that in the notes there. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, that's great. So it's just really nice. So basically his work after MASH, he started working with scientists, and he started hosting, like, I forget what it was, but there was a TV show where scientists kind of brought their knowledge and research and everything to the general public. And eventually the crux of all of it is that he discovered that a lot of times scientists are so brilliant, but they really struggled with communicating their ideas with the average person. And sometimes this happens with our coaches. We've got fantastic coaches that are super smart inside of exercise research and exercise science, and they've read all of the papers, they know all the studies inside out. But unfortunately, you're going to be limited by your ability to communicate that information to somebody. It's only as valuable as your ability to communicate it and when to do so. So that's where there's a communication skill. So why does this bring it back to Alan Alda? He started to work with these scientists and understand that there's a communication gap. And essentially he learned that the skill of improv really helps to support not only actors with thinking on the fly and responding to other people's cues, but it also helps scientists sort of bridge that gap of communication. So improv is a powerful tool, but he also talks a lot about observation and, like a little bit of meditation. So there, you could even, this again, like, it takes work. So you would have to assign yourself, like, hey, today I'm going to, take extra time to maybe not talk and maybe just observe as much as I can, and maybe like this standard meeting or dinner or whatever, and just take like these little pockets of time where you're trying to observe more instead of talk. And I think another way to also do that is also take 5 minutes and just meditate, be quiet, and just observe the world around you. Like, the more that you can do stuff like that, you'll learn actually so much more.
Yeah. I love that. It's a good book. Highly recommend. We'll definitely throw it in the show notes. And you mentioned it there, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, this idea of doing some form of like inner work, or some form of stillness or meditation type practice. Is it as simple as we're practicing the skill of observation, kind of like you said there, or is there more to that, like where if I can learn more about myself or become more aware? Again, I feel like it's something I hear people say all the time, like, if I learn more about myself, that only helps me better communicate and better connect with others. Like, and that's always been kind of like a fuzzy concept for me, but like, where do you think that connection lies between the two?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of muddle my way through this a little bit, so bear with me.
Go for it.
I understand what you're saying, and how that there's like a bit of a disconnect. So I think, like, if you're able to better understand, oh, I might be a little bit insecure about this, and so that's why I have a gut reaction to maybe talk all the time. And, or
It felt like a personal attack.
If anything, like, sometimes I catch myself doing that. I might be uncomfortable with silence, so I just want to fill it with something. And sometimes I think that if you can understand where you're uncomfortable and where you're trying to bridge, or what are some of your pre-programmed subconscious habits, then you start to better understand maybe why you act the way that you do. And then you can start to also see, like, maybe that happens with other people too. And that just is helpful. I think that a lot of times when you can recognize, like, what are your pre-programmed kind of gut reactions to things, if you can ask, we were talking about this, I think, when I was at the summit earlier this week, and the example was sometimes just like, I used an example because we were talking a lot about breath work. You know how sometimes like you're hunting for your car keys, like you've got to go, you're late, you can't find your car keys. It's like the last thing to go. You're already 5 minutes late and you're looking everywhere and you're like, oh my God, how could I lose my car keys? And you're kind of in this frantic place, right? So when you're in that moment, your heart rate is really elevated. You're probably not breathing. And then if you take a second and you just like close your eyes for a second and you take a breath in, exhale out, and then you're like, oh, car keys are right there. So it's one of those sorts of things. That's just a very small example, but in that frenzied moment, you know, when we're all caught up in whatever is happening, then we lose our ability to focus. We lose our perspective. The heart rate's elevated, so that means that, you know, our respiratory rate is elevated. That means that we probably are really tense somewhere as well. So we are not in a place where we can really perform at our optimal. And you know, in moments of duress, we are going to sink to whatever it is that we've been practicing. So if you don't practice calming yourself down and self-soothing on a regular basis, then you're going to continue to respond with this less than optimal, you know, foundational place. So if you practice things like that are really maybe arbitrary, like taking 2 minutes of breath work in the morning, then maybe when you're in these heightened places, you can return to say like, oh yeah, that's right. This is how we get there. I think I answered the question. I don't really
I think
know.
you answered it. I think you mostly answered it, but
I have some
Something.
thoughts within that, and you know, when you mentioned breath, we were talking offline. You say people don't breathe, and that's weird to me. Like I understand what you're saying. I get it from physiological standpoint, and but I think if we say that to people, that statement, like it doesn't make sense, right? Like I'm breathing, I'm living. What are you talking about, right? So what is it? What do you mean by like breath and breath work, and you know the whole car key situation, or any of these small things we get really hyped up over, and just a simple exhale can help us go back to where we should be, right? How do you explain it to um, us here, or even just anybody just not familiar with breath work? What does it mean when you say like we're not breathing?
Mm, we're not breathing well or optimally is probably what I probably should say. Hence why we said it pre-show here, JT.
But I hear that a lot. I mean, like I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but like I say it too, right? When I was like all into it, and like I'm all like, oh, I know all this information. You're not breathing, bro. Like let me teach you something, right? But like for me, like how do we communicate that better to our clients, or even ourselves, or understand that better to really know the value of it and how to optimally do that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of understanding that the body works as a whole system, right? We have all of these, and I'm trying to remember like where I'm pulling this from, but probably like a James Nestor, I would imagine, probably articulated this way better than what I am. But the system, the human body has all of these systems that operate in these different oscillating rhythms, right? So we have our lymphatic system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system. Everything has its own rhythm. Like even when you digest food, you know, your gut, all of that starts to have its own rhythm. A lot of times when we get into these heightened states, then we'll have, you know, a different hormonal response. We'll have cortisol that comes into action. And that a lot of times will just heighten the heart rate. We get into this you know, fight or flight phase. And we're not necessarily in danger, but what happens is it really dysregulates the body's systems. So one thing that we can do, I mean, a lot of these systems, when we talk about, you know, your digestive system, your lymphatic system, you're like, well, I can't really control what's going on there. I don't really know, because a lot of this is visceral, right? And it's all part of the autonomic nervous system. But what we can do is through our breath work, that's something that we can actually really control. And that's pretty awesome, because that's sort of our entry to help regulate all of those other systems. So if we can slow down the breath in moments where we don't need this like really high triggered place, then that helps to calm down the rest of the system. And I think a lot of times, especially in today's culture, it's so easy to be overwhelmed by just everything. We have a massive amount of information that's coming at us at all times. And if we're in these heightened states continuously, like that's where we start to see high blood pressure. We start to see hormonal disruptions. So if we can intentionally know how to breathe, that helps to have that touch point of down regulation if needed. But it also it's just going to teach you, if again, like when we come back to like what is that common practice, to recognize when are you getting into these heightened states. And you might not be the sort of person as well. Like some people don't. Some people are pretty chill most of the time. GT, I'm looking at you. You're pretty calm, I feel. And you know, um, maybe regulation isn't as hard, but I think for a lot of people, it's pretty tricky. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
JT got to upregulate.
I do. And yeah, I don't know, man, there's so much within that. And Phil, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too. I've heard this somewhere. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it's more something I've been observing with a lot of people, even myself, with the being in that heightened state. As a coach, I see it a lot with different coaches. I've seen it myself with like almost sabotaging ourselves subconsciously and trying to stay in that heightened state. For example, like I know, like recently I've been just tardy to everything. Just late to everything. I don't know why, right? And like, what the
Tardy.
frick heck? Tardy, like from school again, right? You get me back into the back in the days with this. My tardiness has eluded me here, right? So it's and what I realized was that like I think subconsciously I liked, like there was something within that where like, man, this cortisol just it's a rush, I just like it, right? I don't say that, but I think a lot of people like almost feel like that's their energy, right? And they're not doing it. I'm not ever late on purpose, but I'm just curious to see what you guys think about like that state of being, because I think that's a reason why a lot of people don't do breath work and um, don't take time to downregulate, because I think it's not part of their identity, right? I don't want to take this into the identity conversation, but I think it's tough to really be that calm JT, right? I'm feeling like I'm hyped, I'm locked in, right? I think people like subconsciously have this thought in their head, but just curious to hear your thoughts on this state. I'm like, why we don't do it? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's been something in my mind.
I do have the capacity to be calm, just for all the listeners, so they can be aware.
I think you're both pretty cool customers,
Thank you, Maureen. You don't have to be nice to us just because you're on our show. I don't know. For me, I
yeah.
feel like it's an awareness issue for me. And I just don't realize until it's too late. Typically, I get overwhelmed and I get anxious.
Yeah.
And like, just like Maureen said, like, I know at this point regularly what strategies will immediately pull me out of that state. Right. And when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling anxious, it typically, I don't catch the early signs of it just because I'm not aware of how they're building up, just because I'm not in tune with how I'm feeling in that moment, both, cognitively, emotionally, but also JT, like you said, I think there might be something to that where I'm like, when you're just grinding on some work, right, and you're amped up and you're, before that tipping point, you're using that heightened state or that sympathetic state to your benefit, but then you can't turn it off or you can't turn it down. Yeah, for me, that's just like a lack of awareness piece to where like Kelly has to be like, go meditate or like go sit down because you're being annoying because you're being all anxious. And like
Like a
it just
baby.
I just like wasn't aware of where I was at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good question, JT, and I think that this is something where it was really I just so appreciated, I think the first time that I had a conversation about managing energy as a coach was maybe like 4 years ago.
Mm.
maybe like five, I'll say. And there was another coach, shout out Coach G. If you know, you know.
You gotta know him.
And
If you don't know him, you gotta know him.
but he was telling me he was and I just so appreciated this because I haven't had this conversation. I think it's so important for longevity and sustainability. Where I said, coaching gives me a lot of energy. Like I feel it, like after I coach a class, like I'm amped up. Yes, no, all right, sweet. And but it also, if I'm teaching especially or coaching for like an all day event, like I might be excited or happy in that moment, but like I do find that it depletes me as well. And a lot of times I think that that's because and this is pretty cool. If you haven't done this, there's and I think like personality tests are interesting for you to know yourself, and this is another tool to kind of help you with that if you want to increase your connectivity with others and your sensibility is maybe taking some of these personality tests. So I took a PI test when I was hired at a corporate site, and one of the cool things that it revealed was that my natural tendency is actually that I'm a pretty shy sort of person. And like that's innately that I'm just sort of like, I don't like to use the word shy, but like what's the word that's not coming to me?
Reserved.
Reserved. Maybe, I don't know, just like a quiet, like non-social kind of person. There's a better word for this.
Introverted.
Yeah, introverted. Nailed it. So naturally, like I'm an introvert, but that I do derive energy from being with groups of people and being with them. But because it's not in my nature, that it takes so much more energy. It's like a behavior change, right?
Mm.
It requires that much more energy for me to ramp myself up to get into that place. And then once I'm there, like I'm good, but it also depletes me. So understanding that like that's what my personality type is really helpful because then I know, hey, I have to have some sort of time to come back to myself and to just like replenish my own energy stores. And that was where I think like it's becoming more practice where people are giving themselves permission to maybe skip out like when you're on these business trips and you're with like the same people from dawn until dusk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're just on the whole time. If that's not necessarily like in your nature to be on like that, then it's being able to like take those, like what do you need to replenish yourself? Maybe it is at the very end of the day saying, I just need to eat dinner by myself. Like Phil, I sent you that picture earlier. I was on a work trip. I cut out and I just was like, I need some tacos and a margarita and I just need to be by myself. I read my little murder mystery book and that was like what brought me back to myself a little bit. So sometimes like, and it might be whatever, but it's important. I know that like having sometimes, like I had a really amazing day where I was pivoting and between a lot of different task switching, and they were all meetings and projects that I loved. I was pumped about. I loved talking with everybody that was there. But I knew that if I don't take a break, then I won't be able to focus. And to your point, JT, I'll be in this like spun up state where it's not necessarily anxiety. It's just that I'm like continually spun up and I'm not really like thinking clearly. So what I do now, I try to catch myself is like, okay, I look at my calendar. I know these sorts of things, like I've got to prepare for it. It's going to amp me up. But before I hit this crash, I need to schedule in this sort of check-in with myself. So for me, that might be an NSDR. It might just be doing like a little bit of movement. It might be taking a walk. I'm a big fan of midday NSDRs. Like I would be so sad if I had to miss out on those ever. So anyway, I don't know if that helps. I'm sorry. Cut me off. This is why I haven't been invited before.
No, this is good. This is good. Yeah, my personal go-to is just eating Chipotle in my hotel room alone, just in silence. It's the most soothing thing that I think that I can do, the best self-care I can do. But like thinking about a plan of action for coaches, I like what you said with like being able to manage their energy, whether no matter what they're coaching, right? No matter if you're on that personal training grind and you're going 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. with a little break in the middle, whether you're a college strength coach, like whether you're working on the corporate side, whoever you are, what would be your major recommendations? I know you hit on a couple different pieces, but trying to put it all together in a plan for coaches to start to better manage their energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough for coaches because, well, let me put it this way. We know that the human mind really has like a 90-minute capacity for maintaining focus. So if you think about that, if we're like scheduling classes or sessions, sometimes you might have two back-to-back classes, right? And that's 2 hours. That's over your 90-minute attention span. So for me, I remember if I ever had 3 classes in a row, I was so loopy afterwards.
Yes.
I felt like I could not be held responsible for the words that were coming out of my mouth. And that's just it's not a place of peak performance, right? Let alone to be like leading other people. And then if we think about a lot of professional sports, those sessions are maybe like 90 minutes or so. So I think if you have the ability in your schedule to have a little bit of flexibility with that knowledge to just say, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes to prep ahead of time, because this is the other thing. I know that like sometimes it would stress me out if I had to set up for a class and then I have like all of these participants or members that are coming up to me ahead of time and they're chit-chatting and they're wanting to get in and it's really valuable, but then I'm like, I didn't get my moment of silence, so if you can find like a space, I know for a while, like sometimes I would just like lock myself in a bathroom stall and just like breathe. But then, and sometimes like that was literally like the only place that I could get. So if that's the thing that helps you out, do it. If you can take a walk, if sometimes the break does not need to be long either. If you can just schedule yourself 5 minutes and just work on down regulation breath work, or box breathing is also beautiful for that. That can go a long way if you have a little bit more time, like fueling. I mean, I think that like the reason why the tacos and what did you say, Phil? What was it? Chipotle?
Chipotle. Yeah.
There was one time in New York, I had a really long week. I got some Thai food. It was the best Thai food I ever had in my life. And I went downstairs to the local wine shop and I just got a bottle. And I think that I didn't drink it all that night, to be fair. But the point
Been a
is,
long
like,
day, Phil.
It's been a long week.
It's been a
I
long
had
week.
a bottle of wine and a pack of Newports, and I just relaxed.
What I was gonna say was maybe just some carbs. Like, I mean, I think that like I was gonna go the opposite direction. My dietitian friends are dying right now. They're like, "What are you telling the people?" But yeah, I think just fueling, like making sure that you're also eating. I know a ton of Group X instructors that also, first off, Group X instructors are another breed of human beings.
Insanity, dude.
If you've ever met an instructor from the 90s that lived through that era, they are different. Yeah. Mind-boggling. But
like 10 plus or like whatever 5 to 10 classes like of you doing the workout,
and they aren't eating.
No. It's insane.
It's actually, yeah, it's impressive that they're alive. You talk about endurance athletes, like to me, like those are the most extreme human beings I've encountered.
We need to do research on them.
Thanks, right.
But yeah, anyway, if you can fuel, like especially like some carbohydrates in that time, like if you're going a lot of back-to-backs, I mean, like take that time to nourish yourself.
Yeah.
And what does that look like for you? But that's just going to be, I mean, and the research shows it. Anytime you take a break for yourself, whether you're coaching, whether you're doing like back-to-back meetings, all this stuff, like I know it doesn't seem productive, but it will actually make the quality work that you're putting into whatever that next thing so much better
Right,
than you
right, right.
having that like I can't be responsible for the words coming out of my mouth syndrome.
Yeah, and that's so important to talk about because it's even for me till this day, I get caught up in needing to do that, and it's because I wasn't preemptive in scheduling those times to down regulate, right? And I was in this false um, handcuff I put to myself. I basically scheduled myself back to back to back to back to backs,
Mm-hmm.
right? I didn't have to. I literally did not have to. It took me a while to realize, like, all right, I don't have to do that. What am I doing, right? And you know,
Hmm.
with what you mentioned, with like finding times to down regulate it's productive, right? And I think it took me a while for me to really understand that to know that that is what will produce the quality of work that I want to produce as a coach, right? And it went to the point where like I thought I was doing that, but I was just sat down after a session. I got 5 minutes left. They just told me they're about to be 10 minutes late. I just start scrolling, right? So I did things that I was not intentionally doing, right? I think that's key for a lot of coaches to really understand. I think we get to the point where we're so tired. I'm just going to do this because it's easy, right? I'm not saying we all scroll, but I think if we intentionally scroll, that's going to be different. What you mentioned, Maureen, like breathing, eating some Chipotle, or going into a nice small place to really be by yourself. I think those things are different. And if it actually is scrolling, I think if we intentionally do that and if we actually tell ourselves, like, I get energy from clicking like on Pushin Performance and sharing it and commenting it, right? Um, then
But
then do
do
it.
you get energy, or is that just a quick dopamine hit
That's the
that's
thing.
actually
I
depleting
think
you?
for me, I tried it. I tried this. I had this little trial. Like I had times in the day where I intentionally, all right, this is when I'm going to scroll, and this is when I'm going to stop scrolling. And I didn't have the same effect. Like, damn, I just canceled that session for nothing. Right? I think it's different. It gave me energy. So I think the point there is being intentional with what you said gives you energy, and no, scrolling doesn't give you energy. But I think it definitely there's ways that we can. Um, now I'm rambling, Phil.
JT's just
I'm
trying to
sorry.
justify his
I
social
know.
media habits, and Maureen's not
I
having
know.
it. Thank you, Maureen, for not having it. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Mute me.
I mean, this is one of those things where, listen, I mean, I've been a victim to it as well, where you're just like, an hour goes by and you're like, what have I been doing? And you're just like, just one more video though. I just want more. I gotta watch
That
it, see what's
the
happening.
algorithm's incredible.
It's
Yeah.
honestly it's horrific for us.
It's
Um, I think that the sooner people can realize that, the better. And it comes to setting boundaries. And JT, I'm gonna pull this in for us, Phil. JT, I'm glad that you brought this up, because this was something this was a reoccurring conversation that I had at the summit with folks. And I know that I've had this conversation with, like, my own personal family and stuff. How much of it is that when you complain about the work or being overwhelmed, how much of this is you versus actually what's being asked of you? And in a lot of cases, it's probably a little bit of both. But I think understanding your role in it is very important. There's a lot of successful folks that tend to be, the types that are like, I can do it all. And they really struggle with sharing the management or sharing the load with other people, or asking for help, or trusting other people to do different work. So they feel like they've got to be on everything. And if you're not built for that, then that's going to be very stressful. And when I say like built for that, most people probably aren't, but there are like some folks that, like you mentioned before, JT, there are some folks that just like, they're less, to bring it back, like maybe less sensitive to some of these different shifts. But again, I think that it's also running on fumes, and we're probably going to see those energy leaks somewhere else if we're not taking those breaks.
Right. And sorry, real quick, going back to when you mentioned how we get energy as a coach, I know we could all agree that we get energy when we, deliver a service, a one-on-one session, a class, whatever case may be. And when you mention like it also depletes it, I think that's where it's tough to delineate, like how does it deplete it when it gives us energy? And I think it it might take a while for us to really understand, like, yes, it does give us energy, but also it depletes it, like you mentioned. But is there a way where there's a sweet spot that we can find within the realm of coaching? Like, if we say to ourselves, coaching gives us energy, but then if for some reason back to back to back to back to backs, at the end of the day, I'm just overwhelmed, burnt out. I'm looking on LinkedIn. I'm looking for a project management role, bro. I can't be doing this no more, right? Is there a way
so
we
much
can
shade in project management?
Is there? I mean, that's me. That was me. That's what I'm saying. Like, that was me. Like, because I was burnt out. But like, is there a way we can really start to understand, like, and delineate? Like, it does give us energy, but it could also deplete it. How can we like start to really think about that and take these actions that you mentioned?
I mean, I view that as looking at a workout. It's sort of the same way, right? Like you need to fuel for a workout. You need to have plenty of sleep for a workout because you know it requires energy. But you're also going to, get the natural endorphin high. And I think that that's what we're talking about when we say it gives you
Mm,
back energy, is that you have this, you have a little bit of serotonin and dopamine that's entering the system, especially, if you're playing a sport that you really enjoy, you're going to feel good because of that, because you're in maybe like some different flow states, you're in this place of enjoyment. And, if you're with other people, you've got some oxytocin that's happening. So we've got a lot of feel good chemicals that are making you feel good. So we can say in some ways, especially in this world where a lot of us are more isolated, we're, by ourselves. So when we hit these moments, we just feel really good comparatively. So we might say that gives us energy. But truthfully, like we also know after a workout, we're going to have to fuel again, right? Because you just worked out. So it did cost you something. So you're going to have to restore the fuel. You're going to have to downregulate the system. You can't stay in these heightened states all the time. And there is a cost. So it's sort of the same thing. Like when you're coaching, when you're presenting, when you're doing something, like you might have to go through this stress period of amping yourself up to it. And that requires, a little bit of prep work. It requires something to get you off the ramp. And then once you're there, you're flying high. It's awesome, but you can't really maintain that for a very long time without there being some sort of drop off or some sort of need.
I wish I heard that years ago. It's so good. It's tough. It's really tough. Like, I think the theme of this show is, and then want to hear what stands out to you too, Phil, is like this self-awareness piece, that always top of my head now, right? It's almost like, damn, I gotta stop thinking about that. I can't anymore. It's just in my head, right? And that's really the key, right? To unlock a lot of these things is we need to be in tune with ourselves a little more and have that self-awareness, because it is important as a coach.
Yeah. But I think the biggest thing for me is, some of the things that Maureen said, all kind of boiling up to you can always do something, right? I think about, days when I was just full bag chasing and would work 6 to 2 and then coach 5 to 8, 3 CrossFit classes back to back to back. And like first class, I'm fired up. You're getting the best, snatch technique drills you've ever seen in your life. And class 3, I'm like, you know what a snatch is. Just do it. You've done it before. Let's just get it going.
I've been doing
And
this all day. You should know what
yeah,
it is.
right. But it's like, maybe there's a time for like a snack and a water break by yourself. Maybe there's a time to like just go to the bathroom and shut the door and take a breath, Maureen, like you said. Like, let's just have a moment here. I know I'm going to be a little depleted, but I can do something for myself. And kind of bringing it back to, how this whole rabbit hole started with talking about what it means to be a coach. Like, at the end of the day, I feel like that's the stuff that allows you to be the best version of yourself as a coach for your clients. And like, your clients shouldn't get a lesser service just because they're coming to the 7 p.m. class and not the 5 p.m. class. right? Like that's not their fault. They should get the same. They're paying the same. We're doing the same thing, right? That they should get the same service. So it's like I feel like, at least for myself, I don't know, I feel like this kind of concept of self-care or managing your energy feels like a selfish endeavor when we're in this industry, and a lot of us are in this industry because we want to give and we care about other people, and we value that. But for me, it's like reframing that has helped a ton, where it's like I'm not just doing this for me, but I'm doing this for me so I can better, show up for others. And like even like at home, like I'll this feels like selfish to take this time, but I'm doing it for me, knowing that it's gonna, help me show up for, my wife, right? And it's like
Yeah,
that reframe has been massive for me.
man. So many things I want to keep digging into, Marie, because I learned a lot from this conversation with you, and also in the years that I've known you. When you mentioned flow state, I think we should, put that in another episode because that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But like what you just said, Phil, it's just like even if all the sessions we give are like high quality, we got to give her, whoever we go back home to also that high quality, right? So I think it's just
Yeah.
a whole spectrum of where we can take these actions. But I need to probably land this plane before Phil gets mad at me for taking this to a 3-hour episode. But Maureen, I have some rapid fire questions for you. You ready for them?
Man, I don't know.
I'm prepared.
You are ready for them. Trust me. All right. We'll make this the first question pretty easy. Okay. Who was a better tennis player, you or Phil?
I'm just gonna be honest. It's Phil.
Wow.
Oh, very humble of you. Okay.
It's just true.
She's only
But
saying that because other people are listening.
I'm working my way though. Believe me, we've got a whole posse that is motivated solely to take Phil down.
If
Ooh.
Maureen reliably used her two-handed backhand instead of just the weird one-hander block she does, she'd be close.
I just need to just remember 2 hands all the time.
You got it. You just got to use it. You got it. It's
Yeah.
in your bag. Strong.
2 hands on them. Put 2 hands on there. All right. I'm gonna have to. I can't vote on that yet because I haven't seen you guys. I don't think I've seen you guys play yet. No, I haven't. So I'm gonna keep
You
my
were
answer
injured.
later. Number 2, favorite Coldplay track.
Oh man. I am so bad at naming songs on the fly. I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie.
You can answer that later. Next one, for mindfulness or being grounded, hiking or yoga. Which one do you prefer?
I mean, I prefer hiking always,
Hiking.
but the benefits of a yoga class are usually more what I need. I'll say that.
Okay, maybe they're not apples on it, but I like that. Last one. Current artists in your workout playlist. Got 1, 2, 3 of them. Coldplay. We'll just put it in there for Phil.
Coldplay is not part of the workout, but I will say The Scientist or Sparks is probably some of my favorite Coldplay material.
There it is, Phil.
Or Eminem, big Eminem fan. He's on every playlist. Dua Lipa, she's on a lot of them these days. And
Sabrina.
No. Oh, Selena Gomez. She's had a couple of good hits out that I'm always just playing.
Selena Gomez. I like it.
I'm a big Selena Gomez fan.
Selena. Wow.
Selena.
I respect it.
A lot of mainstream stuff there, but not proud of that. But that's just
we're not here to
judge
unless you're talking about listening to Coldplay. But you know what? That's all right. It's not all right. But Maureen, thank you again for taking this time, coming on the show. This was maybe not necessarily the plan, but it was a damn good conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. I know people listening will learn a ton. But if they want to learn more, they want to connect with you, where can people follow you, find you, all that good stuff?
Yeah. I still love that we kept what I did a complete mystery. So if you're curious, you can find out.
You'll never know.
Yeah, but I am my handle is mkey_28. I'm not huge on the Insta. It's like here and there, but that's probably I'll respond there.
There you go. There you go. JT, where can people find you?
Coach JT dot M. No, I
No,
was gonna say dot MP3 dot HP. I'm sorry, I switched the handle.
it's new. It's a new
On
thing.
on IG.
It's a new thing, man. You find me on IG at Nashville. You can find the show on IG and YouTube at Pushin Performance with no G. As always, if you like the show, especially this episode, Maureen, leave us a little 5-star rating, leave us a little review, share it with a friend. And Maureen, thank you so much again for coming on for this nonsense with JT and I.
Thanks, Maureen. Appreciate
It's
it.
been a pleasure.
Maureen, we can put what you do in the intro.
Yeah, we're gonna do it for you.
So
Don't worry.
I mean, good luck.
My